Hi everybody. It's December 24th, 2015, Christmas Eve. Well, I guess I could wish you a Merry Christmas, but I guess it's kind of pointless because this video is probably, I know by the time I get around to editing this video and airing it, it's probably going to be January. But anyways, back at the Vernon Lathe here, I ended up getting a deal off of somebody off of one of the forums, and he was kind enough to sell me 3 tool holders. I think I may have already showed these. But anyways, I finally get around to deciding to put them on the lathe here and wanted to center them up and everything. So just a quick explanation of what I ended up doing. First thing I did was put the tool post on, and to square the tool post, in other words, to make sure that this plane right here on the tool post is parallel to here, and also to make sure that this plane of the tool post, this is a perfect 90-degree angle, or it should be. This plane right here is parallel to the front of the chuck. Let me back up for a second. What I'm really trying to say is I want the center line of the spindle to be parallel to this face and perpendicular to this face. Okay? That's what I meant to say. Alright, now that we get that out of the way, how did I go about accomplishing that? Well, what I ended up doing was I had the chuck jaws closed, and we got these flat surfaces on the front of the chuck jaws right here. And theoretically, I know there's wear to contend with and everything like that, but theoretically, when I brought this carriage all the way over and up against that, keeping this a little bit loose, and just brought it right up against it, and it flattened out up against that, and then while it was up against it, I tightened this nut. That should be square, or close enough to square for my purposes. One of my favorite sayings these days, close enough for my purposes. Anyways, so now I got that out of the way. So the next thing I wanted to do was I wanted to, I wanted to figure out what I was going to put in here for a cutter. So I went through my box of goodies there, and I came across this cutter right here. So there's several styles of cutters I have, and this is one of the ones I have that actually the cutter is turned towards the left, which I believe this is called a right-hand cutter. And you would think because it points to the left it would be a left-hand cutter, but I believe it's called a right-hand cutter because this cutter is designed to be able to start on the right-hand side of the cut and then go down this way, moving towards the chuck, as opposed to if it was cut going the other way, it would be designed to cut more towards the tail piece. That would be your left-hand cutter. Alright, so right-hand cutters, left-hand cutters, yada yada yada, and then I even have one that like points straight forward, so not quite sure what the deal is with that. You know, I'm learning as I go along. So, alright, so I decided which shank I was going to put in here. And this has got a carbide cutter in it right now, and the tip doesn't look broken, so for the time being we'll fly with the one that's in there. So the next thing was I want to center this on the work. So in other words, if you had a part in here you were going to turn, if you were able to measure exactly halfway down from the top towards the bottom of the workpiece, that would be the center. And probably not the good terminology to use there, but hopefully you guys get what I'm getting at. I'm aiming for as close to right about here as I can. That would be halfway between here and here. So ideally, that's where I want to be. So what I did was I have this little doohickey right here, which is it's a spring-loaded thing, but it's pretty stiff, and it comes to a point. And I probably could have put something else in there that came to a point that might even work better than that. But for my purposes, there I go again, for my purposes. Ow! Alright. Just jarred my thumb, jammed my thumb on that damn thing. Alright, so anyways. So what I did was I put this thing in here, and then I put this cutter in here, and the little top very edge there of the cutter, I brought that over and I looked at exactly where that's touching just by eye, and I could see that right there I'm at the point where, well, I want to do this while it's tight. Right there I'm at the point where it's just touching. So at that point, that should be, I believe, the optimal setting for turning. Alright? So, the thing I noticed though, in order to get that setting correct, I had to turn this knob way up. Alright, so if you get what I'm saying, I had to lower this cutter way down low. You can see how much of this wedge is exposed here. So much so that the bottom edge of this tool holder is only about 1/4 of an inch above the bottom here. So here's a better look at it. So you can see when I originally put this CA tool post on, and I was concerned that I thought it would be too big, but then when I put it on here I said, oh no, that looks like it'll be perfect, because I was saying how the center line on the chuck there through the spindle looks like it's aiming it right at the midpoint of this tool post. Well, what I forgot to account for is the fact that, you know, you've got the cutter isn't sitting at the center line of this tool holder. The cutter's actually up here somewhat. You know, if we eyeball straight across, it's actually right about here at the top of this slot. Okay, so that's why I had to drop this down so much to get that to line up. So I was able to get it done with this one, but you can see that the bottom edge of this right here is only about 1/4 of an inch above the bottom of the actual tool post. So I don't know whether or not that's going to make a difference or not, but it seems to me like I probably don't want it normally that low. So that's one of the things that makes me think that maybe this CA might still be too big for this lathe. Now, the other concern is that even though I was able to, even if it works perfectly fine with this, I might run into a situation with a boring bar or something down in the future where I can't get it to, you know, the holder to drop down low enough on this tool post. But, alright, it is what it is for now. I mean, it is what it is. What I mean to say there is that, you know, my only alternative is to get a CXA tool post, and the CXA tool posts bring pretty much as much money, and sometimes even more money, than some of the CAs that I've seen, you know, depending on the timing and everything. This CA, I bought this with another CA tool post with like barely any holders, and I got a hell of a deal off of Craigslist on these things. And mainly it was just sitting there, and the reality is the guy who was selling these, if he had pulled the list, not put it on Craigslist and just listed each one of these separately on eBay, he would have done much better. But you know, lucky for me, he didn't want to bother with eBay, so I got a really good deal on these. I was able to turn around. I just recently sold the other one, and that helped finance the purchase of the 3 holders, and so I made out really well on that. I could probably sell this tool post and then take the money from this and buy a CXA. Thing is, I just got the 3 holders in, so you know, oh well. So tonight what I want to do is I want to try and do some test cuts with this carbide cutter index deal here, because last time, which was the first time I actually turned anything on this lathe, I was using this tool holder right here with this brazed tip or cemented carbide cutter tip, and I was having a real hard time getting this to cut really well. And then I noticed that when this actually shifted a little bit and turned, the angle on this tool holder went down a little bit, it just started to cut better. And the reason why is because if you look at this cutter right here, this holder actually has the hole, the square hole that this cutter goes into is at an angle. So it's not going straight out like this, it's at an angle. Well, the rake that's on this type of a cutter is designed so that this cutter should be in a straight holder. So this cutter should be coming out straight like that, not pointing up like that. So when this tilted down like that, effectively what I ended up doing at that point was I ended up actually getting this more at the correct geometry. You can actually see the front, the rake here. When this is tilted up like this bottom edge right here is going to want to rub before the cutter can actually do its work. So anyways, we've got it to the point now where we've got what I believe is the right kind of a cutter and the right kind of a holder and a good rigid setup here. So I'm hoping that we're going to now be able to do some decent turning with this thing. Oh, another thing I want to mention is last time I was turning on this lathe, I had just grabbed this piece of stock, or this piece that I had, and was using it, and I just realized now that because it's so shiny and everything, I decided to check, and I've got my hunk of magnet right here. This is non-ferrous. This is probably high-grade stainless steel, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe that is a little bit more of a sticky wicket when it comes to turning. It's not necessarily a free machining steel, so I think I'm going to grab something else because, you know, I'm a noob. So, well guys, it's December 25th, the evening of December 25th, Christmas. And last night I was down here and I went up for supper and never made it back down here. So, make a long story short, I never did get around to doing the test cuts. And with Christmas Day and everything and all the festivities, I didn't have any time to come down here, but I really was itching to get some test cuts done, so I finally found a little bit of time later in the evening here. And I was just about to do some test cuts, and then it occurred to me I did have a little bit of housekeeping left to do on the lathe here. There's a couple things left. I still haven't put the tapering jig on, but I don't need that on right now. The other bit of housekeeping was this assembly that actually goes in here, which consists of this assembly right here, this lever, okay, which goes through this hole, and then on the back side there's this piece right here, and this little fork right here actually engages part of that triangle shaped bracket lever assembly that goes underneath the headstock and actually actuates the direction change. Now, as you may recall from earlier videos, if you've been watching this right along, I did have a problem still with that lever being very easy to fall out of gear. So the vibration and everything would just cause that lever to slowly drop out to a point where it would basically go into neutral and my lead screw would stop rotating. So one of the things I thought was that, well, maybe by having this assembly on there, which the way this works is that once this is in on this side, I have a long rod that goes across and actually attaches to a mounting point on the bottom of the apron, and then all the way down the end it attaches to the very end bottom corner of the bed. And what that lever does, that lever has adjustable stops on it, so that what you can effectively do is you could set this up so that if you could set a stop so that you could literally start engage the feed, and the apron, when it comes over far enough, would actually push on the stop, which would push this lever over, which would push this lever, and theoretically it's supposed to push it into our neutral. So the whole idea of that extra lever being on there and everything, that might put enough of a drag, so to speak, on the mechanism that it might be less likely to fall out of gear on me. I don't know. This is all theoretical at this point. And then I even noticed, like where this rod goes through here, I can get the rod to go through, but I have to wiggle it to get it through, and it's a little tight. And my first thought was, well, I might have some paint on there from when I spray painted the leg here originally, when I first thought I was going to paint this thing, or primer or whatever. My first thought was, well, I could zip that with a wire brush and clean that right up and put a little bit of grease on the shaft so that it works nice and smooth. And then all of a sudden I thought, well, wait a minute, you know what? It's not so tight that it doesn't actuate. Maybe, just maybe, I should just leave it and actually let that friction work to my advantage possibly. So I'm going to do that. So this is going to go in like this, and then I've got to get a Woodruff key on the back side and this on. Well, I just finished cleaning up the components of this this stop rod assembly, this automatic stop assembly, in the parts washer here, and I found a few things. First of which is there's a nasty bend in this rod. Seems pretty flat actually from like here down. So the bend appears to be right in this area right here, but it's a pretty severe bend. So I have to try and get that out. I think I may have inadvertently done that when I was moving the lathe. I think at some point something shifted and that got damaged. Not positive on that, but we'll try and straighten that out. Luckily this, I don't think, is critical how straight this is. I think it, straight enough will do it. Second thing is, these are the stops that you set by simply a hex head bolt here. It's a split design, so essentially it clamps into position on the rod here. And when I went to move this down this end of the rod, it was stopping right over here. And it turned out there was some damage right here on the rod, and I filed that away. So now the part moves pretty smoothly. And then also the second stop, the one up this end, looks okay from the front, but on the back side there's a very ugly weld. So it appears I can see a crack right there. So this stop had broken once, and somebody just did a really nasty weld up job on this, quick and dirty. It doesn't even look like they grooved. It doesn't even look like they cut a groove here for the filler metal. So I don't know how good that is. The good news is this is actually on the right hand stop, so this would be the stop that would control it, automatically shut it off when it went when the carriage got to a certain point over to the right. So this would be like for the rare times when you're, I guess, probably turning up to a shoulder on the right hand side. So I think this is going to get a lot less use than this one. Of course these are interchangeable by the looks of it, but so we're going to keep that one on the left. And then this, which is the bracket all the way over to the far right that supports the far right end, this has this tang of metal, this thin piece of metal that's been attached, and it's clear to me that that was a kind of again a down and dirty modification here. The screws don't look straight. This piece of metal that was cut was not cut straight, and for whatever reason it looks like somebody drilled and tapped the back of this to mount this little metal plate on here. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of that is. Maybe once I get it mounted on the lathe, maybe it'll become apparent why they might have done that. And then the last component is the actual part that attaches to the apron, which has the fine adjustment on it, which I guess I forgot to take out of the parts washer. But that's this assembly right here. And so this has got a knurled knob right here to turn this barrel, which has fine threads on it. So this is your fine adjustment. So you're going to set that stop, clamp the stop into its rough position, and then use this to set the fine stop so that you can get it to really be accurate. Now, that's all fine and dandy except for one thing. I'm wondering how that would end up working as far as the amount of play in the linkage itself. And I guess the only way to really find out how much that affects this would be to, well, actually just test it out and see what happens. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. I just want to put this together and see if I can get some of those test cuts done tonight before I run out of time. I got the rod pretty roughly straightened out. Doesn't look like it matters whether it goes this way or this way. So this has to go in this direction, which leaves this little sharp piece of metal, which I haven't been able to figure out the purpose of, hanging out, just facing that way. I don't understand what that's for. Well, there does seem to be a little more drag on the handle now. Maybe that'll help. But the more I think about it, the more I'm realizing that if I wanted to actually put some sort of like a detent control in here that kept that locked into position, that'd be a perfect spot to do it, would be right down the end. Rather than getting into the mess of trying to do something inside the headstock, why not just do something down here on this rod, down the end here. I'm wondering whether or not there was something here and that's what this metal piece is for. In other words, I mean, there could have been even something as simple there as just like a rubber bushing or something on the outside here that this is holding into position that would put like some friction on this thing. I don't know. Something to think about. Of course, we could do something better. Who's we, Steve? Me and the mouse in my pocket.